feeling?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, it's a beautiful day, so I'm glad to see you all. And folks who are walking up over there, you all are welcome to join us. So my name is Sinead Younge, and I am a professor of psychology at Morehouse College, and also director of the Institute of Social Justice, Inquiry, and Praxis. So I'm a guest here on this unceded land of the Duwamish, and it's such a pleasure to be on this hallowed ground in this space, sharing space with these wonderful people and with all of you today. So I'd like to start out by just welcome you all, and some of you have been here for the past couple of days. We kicked this off on Friday, and so now we are going into our third day of programming. And we're going to have programming all week long and next week as well. So please do continue to come out. If you're on social media, we're using the hashtag #CreatedCommons. Created Commons. This event is being curated, being put on by Lila Vision. And at the end of our panel, in between acts, we invite you to come and flip the bird. You can come, and this beautiful creation from Ela Lamblin, you can come and make this bird's wings flap. All right, so we are here today, and we're here for a lot of different reasons. So we started this off on Friday talking about how interconnected we are and the interconnections between social justice, science, and health. So speaking of which, there's a couple of things that I just want to do some housekeeping really quickly. As I mentioned, we are on the unceded land of the first people, the Duwamish, and in order for us to be here and honor these First Nations, we have a real rent. So Leah Mann is going to walk around. She has a QR code that if you are so inclined to pay honor to the First Nations people, please do scan and provide a donation or rent for being in this space. Under the white tent over there, there's Discovery Health. They are giving free vaccinations. They have Pfizer and J&J. So that if you know someone, if you yourself is not yet vaccinated, please call your friends, tell your aunties, your uncles, your cousins, come and get vaccinated today, okay? They'll be out here, and they'll also be in the community tomorrow as well, so I'll share some more information about that. So what I like to do when I get started is just ask folks a question. And those who have been here for the past couple of days, I'm sure you know what I'm going to ask you. And so I'm going to say to you, Ago. And your response to me is Ame. So when I say Ago, you say Amen. And what that's saying to me is that you're going to give me $100 via my Cash App. So thank you very much. What that's really saying in Twi, so this is a language from Ghana, it's really saying, are you listening? So Ago is just asking, are you listening? And Ame is saying, you have my full attention. So Ago, Amen. Ago, Amen. Wonderful. Thank you for giving me your full attention. So today we have a really wonderful discussion. I've had the honor and the pleasure of meeting these folks, and we're going to get into some stuff. So I would like to first start out by introducing Candice Jackson, who is the founder and director of the African American Health Board of Seattle. So if you're not familiar with this organization, the African American Health Board of Seattle works to assure health equity through policy, systemic change, and institutional accountability. Candace herself is a visionary, a values-based health equity strategist committed to driving change alongside communities. So let's welcome Candace Jackson once more. Next up, we also have Dani Tyrell. Dani is the founder and current artistic director of the Congregation, a movement and art group. Dani's doing a lot. Dani has a lot of jobs. Dani is currently teaching at Northwest Tap Connection and the University of Washington, Seattle, and Bothell campus. Am I saying that correctly? Dani has created work for Dance This, Northwest Tap Connection, Strictly Seattle, Seattle Repertory Theater, Nina Simone's For Women. Dani is an Arts Matter Fellow, Artist Trust Fellow. It goes on and on and on. But some of you may or may not know this, but Dani is going to be the new Associate Curator and Producer at Dance Place in Washington, D.C. So that's a big deal. So we want to congratulate Dani on his new position and just thank you for coming out because we know you're in the middle of a lot of things going on.
It's all good.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation and we will have some time for some questions from the audience. So even though we are up here and you're a little bit far away from us, if you have a question, there'll be a little bit of time towards the end. So don't be shy. Don't hesitate to ask a question. So right now, a lot of people talk about these dual pandemics of both COVID-19 and the racial injustice. As most of us sitting here today know, these are not new. The same conditions that brought about the inequities that we're seeing with COVID have been around probably since this country was colonized, right? So, what I would like to start out by asking, I'm going to start with Candace, is just how you came to the work that you're doing. Kind of what's the origin story? And then we'll move to Dani.
Necessity. So the work that I'm doing, or the work that we're doing with African American Health Board, really was born out of having one foot inside of an institution and another foot in community, and seeing a huge disconnect, right? That the institution had no understanding of what needed to happen in order to make what community needed to happen. And so really wanted to play the role of bridge builder and an opportunity to also help translate some of the things that we have the privilege and opportunity of seeing internal to these large institutions that communities don't, right? There's an access and there's a privilege there. You've got access to information, resources, you understand how these systems function, and those are often things that externally we see community just kind of shooting in the dark around. We know what we want it to look like, but we often have not had the opportunity to be at those tables because, we know how those tables are functioning and the history behind how those tables were created and what they're intended to do. So in part, this was about also building our own table. And so, this was really and truly born from Black women doing this work locally.
I love that. It reminds me of when Shirley Chisholm said, if you're not invited to the table, bring a folding chair.
That's right.
And I like to say sometimes you got to kick the table over. So Dani, can you tell us about your origin story? How did you come to this work that you do?
I'm like, which part of the story? It's so many entry points, but I think I'll start with just as an artist. Artists are badass people. We are not normally given our due respect unless we reach a level of being on TV or album sales. But the artists I know, they're just badass people in the way that they present their art and in the way that they think about how art changes things. So this work for me is about art transforming the way that we think about life, period. Yes, scientists are great, but then also look at the artists because they push things forward, they move culture forward. And then I'm going to even say, look at Black artists. And then I'm going to say, look at Black women artists. Then I'm going to say, look at Black trans artists. And then I'm going to say, look at Black young artists. So it's like on and on and on and on and on. A lot of things that push culture forward. is through Black people. The things that you're wearing right now, the way that you think, the music that you listen to. Country music is not white people's music. It's actually Black people's music. So when we look at the things, it's like you can trace it directly back to Black people and how art has influenced so many things. So I think when I'm thinking about the curating part of my work, I'm like, who is interesting me? Who are the voices that I want to listen to? Who are the voices that's making me question things about myself? And so when I curate work, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, we have so many beautiful artists in Seattle, but then I'm like, who's that person way in the back that's like not being seen? And I'm like, I want that person, and putting them in a space where they can have a voice and their voice is heard. So that's a little part of why I do the work.
No, that's amazing. A question that I have for both of you, for folks who may or may not be familiar with the work that you both do, particularly during this time, what is a message that you would like to get out to folks in this, where we are right now? And I mean it's a very broad question because there's so much going on, but just, you know, the question is, what keeps you up at night and what's the messaging that you're trying to give to people?
I'm just going to riff off what you just said, Dani, because I think it's so essential. You know, one of the biggest learnings that we had in this pandemic, as we started to try and meet needs in our community, we're hearing things on the ground, we're understanding like where the confusions are, what messaging needs to happen, what resources need to go to people. The overarching thing for us as Black folks is that we have not had the opportunity to just experience joy in the ways that we need to through this, and that is actually so central to our healing and our health. We started to realize we can't do like public health things and dismiss art and dismiss joy and dismiss creativity. Like, those two things have to go hand in hand. So as we've been doing pop-up events, we've been having space where people can dance and move their bodies and have fun, you know, do some healing arts, and also recognizing people are in so many different spaces right now, that our mental health is so central to us even being able to make the decisions we need to make, both for ourselves and our families and our communities. And if you don't have a headspace that's clear, that you feel supported in, that you can come and just let go a little bit, it's going to be so much harder to do that community care piece.
What keeps me up at night are the people that we forget. The people, I am blessed to live in a place of privilege. And I don't say that or take that lightly. I understand that I work my ass off, don't get me wrong. But I work my ass off for the privileges that I have. And so anytime that I see something that does not feel right or is inequitable, I try to say something and do something about it. Be it passing on money to folks in the way that I can, be it opening up opportunities for people, being it just standing out of the way, being it listening to Black women, being it listening to Black children, being it listening to children. And just even what keeps me up at night is like how we don't value our children, how we don't value our youth. My 2-year-old nephew has more wisdom than I do at times. I'm like, oh, I remember a particular time I was on a Zoom meeting for the organization I work with, and he walked in a room and he was like, it's time to play. And he pulled me away from the meeting. I said, okay, it's time to play. And so what that reminded me of is that children know when it's time for a break and it's time for joy. And so listening to children, listening to those that don't have as much that we have, and also giving, it's nothing to give to people. You know, we take so much in this world, and then as soon as we're asked to give, it's like, but if I give, I don't have. You're actually going to have more. Right. So that's just some of the things that keep me up at night.
Can I say another thing that's keeping me up at night? Because a lot of stuff is keeping me up at night. You know, I will just speak blatantly. Our policy, and you know, we work on policy and systems things. Our policies that are intended to protect us, and when I say us, I really specifically mean Black people. the policies that are out there that are intended to, even in some cases stated that they are equitable and or protecting us, are actually harming us. We don't have a policy environment right now that's protecting our babies. We don't have a policy environment that's supporting small black businesses. We don't have a policy environment in which we're supporting black and brown, queer, trans youth. We don't have a policy environment that is prioritizing mental health resources writ large for our community. So, you know, those are the things that keep me up at night. You know, we're often told, well, go run a program, you know, spend $100,000 and, you know, help do what you can in your neighborhood. Knowing that those are structural things that actually need to shift for all of us, and all of us will be better off once those things shift. So that's what keeps me up at night. You know, the piecemeal approach to reparations, to our wellness and our liberation. Those are the things that keep me up.
No, thank you for that. So, you know, one of the things that I often hear from people is just what you mentioned. Some of these are structural things, like I'm doing the right thing, I'm a good person. What is it that we can get? What advice can we tell people? What can they do to help address some of these structural issues?
I would say a couple of things. You know, the like classic answer is like, know who your representative is, et cetera, et cetera. I actually think there's more power in knowing who's already organizing in your community. So, like, get to know if housing matters to you, if mental health matters to you. Start figuring out who in community has already started organizing around that and start to build with those people. I think we have a massive opportunity here to just learn from each other. You know, our systems have set up these silos so that we think that when we're focusing on education, it's health is not in the picture, civics is not in the picture, art is not in the picture, but that's a fallacy and we know that, right? So thinking about how we start to coordinate with one another in community and build amongst ourselves so that we can actually structure a plan to just tell systems what they need to be doing, like, full stop.
I want to add on to that. I think it's also about what are you willing to sacrifice and give up in order for your neighbor to be okay? You know, it's like we can look at everybody else, but if I'm not willing to sacrifice a meal so somebody else that does not have a meal to eat, then I'm, good person or not, I'm actually a horrible person. Because it's like, oh, I'll give 50 cents to this, but are you actually going to give up a good steak dinner so that person can eat, knowing that tomorrow you can still get a steak dinner and they may not be able to? So it's like, put the mirror up to yourself. Like, forget about looking at other folks. A lot of times you have to look at yourself, because if you're not looking at yourself, then it's going to bite you in your ass. Sorry, y'all, I'm just cussing a lot, but it's what it is. It's going to be what it is.
It's a lot of emotion. It really is. We've been at
I'm not going to apologize for that. You know what? Language is language.
Amen.
So.
No, that's real. I will say, too, Marlon, because we were talking, see?
Marlon's my husband.
Hi, Marlon. I talk to them a lot, so.
Yes.
No, Dani, you know, the thing that I'm remembering from what we were talking about, sometimes how hard that is for us, mm-hmm. right? That sense that we have been taught that individualism is the way to go, that the dream is a $1 million home with the wife and the 2 kids, and it's just y'all, right? Like, we've somehow left this sense of, like, I can remember back in when I grew up, my grandparents' house, you know, we cared for each other in the neighborhood in ways that just felt like normal and natural, right? Like, somebody's making dinner tonight, we're going over there. And what that really meant, you know, from as a child is like, oh, I just had other spaces to play. But really and truly, it was that folks was tired. People didn't want to cook dinner every night, right? And so there was this different way of leaning into each other that was a different value system and actually just brought so much more joy. And that's the thing, like what you're mentioning, Dani, that's the piece that I think we need to get back to.
Yeah. Something you said, Candace, about how do we address these issues, particularly in community, and how do we get people to act. And I love the advice that you gave in getting to know who your community organizers are. And I just want to add on to that, how do people become organizers themselves? Because I think it's a heavy term that people often feel like, you know, I can't do that. I have a full-time job. I got 3 kids. You know, there's many reasons. And I think just the label feels a little heavy to people. So from both of you, who I imagine you would consider yourselves, well, do you use do you use that label? Does that label resonate as an organizer, as an activist? Do any of those labels fit for you, or is there a different label that you would use?
I don't think I'm an organizer. I just care for people. At least I hope I care for people. Some people may disagree, but oh well. And I think that's the thing. It's like, you don't have to look at yourself as this thing. Do you care for people, and what will that push you forward? Again, do you care enough for someone to make them a meal? Do you care enough for people to like buy popsicles for everybody, kids on the block? Do you care enough just to call somebody and say, how are you doing? I think that's part of organizing. We forget that. It's not about marching. I'm not going to march on the street. That's just not my thing. But there's other ways that you can organize and or care for people. So I think, like, from the most simplest thing of cutting your neighbor's grass to the thing of marching on the street, like, it all matters to humanity.
I have struggled so much with this, and I feel the same way. Like, I might use some of those words just as a shortcut to help other people who I'm not in space with maybe understand some of that. But I think it's really hard for me to own that as well. And I also think it's because there is, I think, a new leadership model emerging in our community where you don't have like the 5 to 10 organizers that just everybody should know. That's too much weight. That's too much work. It's too much responsibility, right? So I love this idea of like, you are organizing the people you're around. You're organizing your family and your friends. You learn about something that's going to impact your community, your neighborhood, your school, your babies, and you do something about it. You organizing. So I mean, that piece for me is, it's about relationship first and foremost. And you know, I will say this as somebody who's like not an extreme extrovert. Sometimes that gets exhausting, right? To trying to be everywhere and meet with everybody and know what everybody is doing. And I would say that's not the, you know, I think that's been a perception of like how people have to function as organizers in order to make an impact in their community. And I don't think that's true.
I would also say, like, because Candace, you and I, we have so much outward facing careers and the things that we do, people assume things about you. But I remember we went to the holiday at your house. That was organizing. That was taking care of community. We got to just kick back and not be those people. And so I think when you're so outward facing, also people assume that that's what you want to do. There are some people that they love that spotlight, and there's some of us that we're just like, we're actually not those people. But because of what we do, we have to be. But I can just kick it in somebody's backyard and be totally okay before we leave. Anyway.
That's excellent. So yesterday was actually the anniversary of the March on Washington that happened in 1963. And a lot of people forget that the full name is the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So I'm here from Morehouse College, which is the alma mater of Martin Luther King Jr., who has been sanitized quite a bit through history. And actually had a lot of thoughts about health and environmental health. And, you know, in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here?, he talked about spending some time in Chicago, and he brought his family up to Chicago from Atlanta. And he said, you know, I was there for the summer and the kids started acting differently. And it's because they, you know, didn't have anywhere to run around. They didn't have green space. It was hot, you know, just all of these things. And I think about, you know, our communities, particularly Black and brown communities. And I'm not as familiar with Seattle, but I'm learning more about Seattle. I do know this is a very affluent community, but not everyone benefits from the affluence, from the wealth that's in this city. So can you all just talk a little bit about how social justice issues interact or interface with health issues and the disparities that we see in the city? Does anyone want to start?
They're the same. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I mean, I think it's so interesting because, we say social justice and we say health and wellness. Some time back, we did a community survey where we were just asking people, like, how they even oriented the words around, like, mental health, which we know. I don't know about y'all's black families, but my black family does not talk about mental health. We'll be like, are you all right? Are you good, though? Like, we have other language to ask that question about, like, how we're doing. But I say that to say the answer to that question is tied up in, are you stressed out about your babies getting ready to go back to school in the middle of COVID without resources? Do you know that you are going to be able to pay rent? And if you can't pay rent, where support is going to come from? Like all those other factors, what we would consider social justice factors, are the basis, the core, the foundation for health. And then, like you mentioned, you add environmental factors on top of that, and you have so many other considerations around clean air and our babies with asthma, and do people have access to parks to just be able to, like you said, get out and move around? I mean, so some of those things, this is why I say I think they are one and the same. In the public health sphere, we use this language, social determinants of health, which is basically all the components of your life that bring you to a space of, like, I feel great today, right? And if those components are off or awry in any one of those spaces, you're not healthy. You're not all right.
I was actually thinking about, when you asked that question, I was thinking about the Central District, and I was also thinking about food and restaurants and resources to groceries. And if you are a black person, a brown person, sometimes most of the times you can't afford a PCC. Like, the idea of organic food is great, but organic food is expensive. And so when you move out of an area, or people move into an area, the restaurants start to get more expensive. The people in the restaurants let you know that you're not welcome there, so then you can't eat there. And so then you have to figure out how you're going to get food on the budget that you have, which means you either have to catch a bus or drive further away. And sometimes McDonald's is all a family can afford, or pizza, and then you're taxed with soda, but that's all you can afford on the money that you make. And so then you go to a park and people are looking at you, why are your children and you at the park? Like, it's so many different things, how this affects people in so many different ways that we don't even think about, of just like basic food. Like, can we have a healthy yet affordable restaurant for black and brown families to go to that's accessible to everybody? Can we have restaurants that actually know what social justice is, and then bring, like, their prices down, or at least have a day or two where they can feed families that don't? We don't think about things like that. And then we go back into the housing. Most black and brown people are pushed out of Seattle at this point in time. We work in Seattle, but then we live 45, and it takes us 45 minutes, an hour and a half to get to work, back and forth to work. Then that means you get home, you don't have time to actually go outside with your family and do things, because they got to do homework, you're getting home really late, then it's time to go to bed and start the routine again.
So Ago, you guys still with us? So I wanted just to open up the space a little bit and see if there are any questions or comments from the audience before we move on. Anyone have any questions or ideas? Is this starting to make you think about some things that you can be doing in your own lives? I see some heads nodding. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. A lot of times people come to these sorts of events and these talks, and it's a beautiful space. And something you said, Candace, about being in community with folks. First Nations people tell us all the time, we are interconnected. So it's not just about, and Dani, I think you mentioned this as well, paying your taxes and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's about, well, what does my neighbor have to eat? Because if I don't take care of my neighbor, I'm really not taking care of myself either, right? I can't pollute my neighbor's water and try to fish out of that water. It doesn't make sense. Right. So I think that, it's extremely important that we're on this land, on the Duwamish land, to acknowledge the lessons that are here, right? Exactly. So one of the other questions I had for you all is, how How are we complicit? Everyone here, we are privileged. We're in this beautiful space. It's a Sunday. We're not at work. We have the space and the time to be here. How are we complicit in some of these issues?
You know, I think we could go with, like, you know, we're complicit in so many ways. Let me just say this. If you live in your life, you drive in a car, stopping at stoplights, going to the grocery store, paying your mortgage, going to your 9 to 5, you're complicit. Unfortunately, like, we're part of the system, right? Like, it doesn't function without us. We're in it, right? I would say, though, that it almost, when you asked the question, it made me flip it in my own mind. And the things that we need to be doing to work ourselves toward liberation is really that piece that you mentioned, Dani, which is like that internal look, right? So, you know, I am able-bodied, right? How often, and when I'm talking about Black and brown issues, am I making sure to intersect disability justice into that conversation? How often am I making sure I'm intersecting gender into that conversation? How often am I talking about language needs within Black and brown spaces, right? So just because it's not an issue that per se impacts me, that relationship piece, well, you got a relationship right now with that bee. That relationship piece is so central because you start developing, first of all, you could read all you want to, right? But you're only going to learn really authentically in relationship with people. I had an elder that pulled me aside early in my career and was like, if you don't actually have deep, authentic relationships with the communities you intend to serve, you'd be no better off than these institutions that are perpetuating white supremacy. And so that has been a mainstay for me, and something I think no matter who you are, you can't take that for granted, because it can be white supremacy one day, it could be gender violence the next day, it could be ableism the next day, right, or the next minute, or intertwined. And so it is incumbent upon us to make sure we're doing our work. And when I say work, I really just mean like building relationship, because you're going to start shifting the way you move if your relationships are also intersectional.
And we're done. Right. I'm complicit when I don't interrupt things that I know is wrong. And that happens more often than not, out of fear, out of harm. It's always funny when I hear church people say, be like Jesus. And I'm like, well, you ain't that brave. And so I realize I'm not that brave at times, you know? And so that's when I know I'm the most complicit, when I don't interrupt something that I should interrupt. And also learning to work that muscle. It's a muscle that you have to work. Like, you just can't go out there like, I'm going to burn down everything that's wrong. Like, there's consequences to that. So you have to learn those muscles, and it really takes some time to do that. So that's when I feel I'm the most complicit.
Absolutely. I think we could all relate to that. So I appreciate you all being vulnerable enough and you know, open enough with us to share that, because I think that's a sentiment that's shared by most. And many people are not willing to admit it, because we tend to lift people up and think that they're infallible, and we all are. So I appreciate that. So I'm curious, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, about forms of joy and resistance as well. So I'm really curious for you all, what is bringing you joy these days? What's bringing you joy?
Dani brings me joy.
Ditto, Candace, of course. Duh. Definitely, Candace is a part of my family, so yes, definitely family. Chosen family brings me joy. You'll see a bunch of my chosen family today on stage at 5 o'clock. These folks bring me so much joy. That's why they're here. So stick around. It's going to be a great show. What else brings me joy? I'm working with 3 dancers. They are working with me. And I talked about I'm able to dream with them. So being able to dream with people and share your dreams with people, so that you can be held accountable to make those things reality. I think that's bringing me joy right now. of not being afraid to like share my dreams with folks. Because again, we're like, we're not supposed to say this. We just do it until the magical thing happens. Well, the magical thing is not going to happen if I keep it to myself all the time. So I had to like share with these dancers because I trust them. Again, they're family to me. But it was just great to dream with them. So that brings me joy. Moving to DC is bringing me joy. Sorry, Seattle, I love y'all, but it's bringing me joy.
So I think we're all going to go to DC and visit Dani. I think it's an open invitation for brunch in DC.
Yes.
So we'll show up. We'll show up.
I know already. I know.
So as we begin to wrap, again, if there are any questions, please feel free to wave at me. Miss Aisha, please come on up.
How do y'all do this work without feeling like the saviors of everybody?
How do you do the work without being the saviors of everyone?
As Black people.
How do you not have Black
nobody want that job? Actually, it's a really good question, and I think it has everything to do with like checking yourself around the little behaviors that feed into that role, and I think it's so easy to do. I think too, because we're all tired, it's really easy for people to be like, oh cool, yay, and celebrate those of us who are doing work in any sort of public facing way as like, you're gonna fix it. But I'm actually so glad you asked that question, because one of the conversations we've been having in Black spaces is like, there's a fundamentally different leadership model that does not require the Martin Luther King or the Malcolm X, to be doing this work. It actually requires all of the Black people in this space to be part of doing that work, so that we're saving each other. There is no one, And then the other thing that really annoys me about, I'm like, I also like reframing for myself and consistently reminding myself my job is not to undo white supremacy. That's white folks' job.
Hello.
Like, my job is liberation, healing, rest, wellness, and focusing on my people. And I think if we flip into that joy space and we remember that, I think it comes naturally. Because you can't be uppity and be joyful at the same time. It just doesn't work.
You can't?
No.
I would agree with
think about uppity person. The little nose is stuck in the air and little faces. That's not a happy face. No.
I agree with Candace, everything that Candace said. And also I think when you are in a perceived leadership position, you also have to learn to be a follower. A good leader follows, and so then that means you don't have to save everybody. And then I thought that was a beat. Look, y'all, I will run up off the stage real quick. Leadership changes, and so again, you have to be a follower. You have to learn to be led.
Humility. Oh my goodness. Humility. And that, that seems so cliche, but it's so easy being steeped in white supremacist culture everywhere around us to forget when it's sliding in, which is, again, I lean back on. This is why relationships are so important, because if I do something off color, I know Danny's going to be like, so, about that thing you said the other day.
Accountability.
Right.
Accountability.
Yeah. And I know he's going to do it in love, Danny is going to make sure that I'm good, and I'm going to make sure that they're good, and it's all going to, that's what we do for each other.
Absolutely. Leah.
In the intense work that you do at Morehouse and with the Andrew Young Center for Leadership, what brings you joy in the midst of that?
So the question is, what brings me joy as well? And it's really spaces like this and meeting people like this, like all of you. These past 2.5, 3 days is what has brought me a lot of joy. And knowing that change is possible. Knowing that change is possible. So my final question, unless there's anyone else that has a question, don't be shy or comment. And thank you for those who are just joining us. My final question is, can you give us a peek into what your vision for the future looks like? What a more inclusive, a more equitable, a more just future looks like? What does that look like for you?
the first thing I thought about is everybody just looking fly as hell. Like, just in your best fit, feeling good about yourself. I just go back to care. I just go back to just that basic need of care. And looking good while you care for somebody. Whatever your look good is, but you just look good while doing it and really just care for people. And seeing yourself in people. I know it's like we talk about like white folks a lot, and we have to, because white folks, y'all so much. Y'all own so much. Y'all have so much wealth that y'all just really need to look at yourselves. It is not our job anymore. And look at yourself and then get out of our way. Look at yourself, get out of our way, and give us money. Because y'all have it. And I'm not even being funny, but if you really look at what's happening, and that's going to help the world. Y'all start looking at yourself and stop looking at us. Because it's not my job no more. I cannot. Y'all make me exhausted. I get tired of myself, so I know I'm tired of white folks at times. I love y'all, but I'm tired. So don't take it as not loving y'all, but we get exhausted because we see the eyes, we see the stares, we see the like, what are you gonna do? Like, just make us better people. We cannot make you better people. So to answer that question, you have to make yourself better people while we work on ourselves, and then maybe we can come together and do a thing. Maybe.
Absolutely. And before Candace answers the question, Lee is going to be walking around with a QR code so people can give up some money for real rent, Duwamish. This is sacred land that we're on. So, Candace, what is your vision for a more inclusive and equitable future?
What does it look like? Well, I will say this. I think it starts with our ability to rest, because I think part of what hampers our dreams is that very intentionally we've been placed in jobs and spaces and environments where our rest is dang near impossible. Like, even when we literally have time off, I know so many black and brown folks who can't sleep, who wake up anxious, who are doing other things to make sure that they can just try and get 5-6 hours in of just some downtime, even if it's not full sleep, right? Like, we have to start, and I go back to the systemic piece, right? We have to start really looking at who's making decisions around how we rest. Now, there's some choices that we have around that, some, right? And the more privilege you have, the more choice you have in how you orient yourself around rest. But I think it starts with rest. It starts with us being able to just recenter, find each other again, and then find that space of joy. And then from there, we can dream. And that piece to me is really exciting. So we're getting ready to do a big thing called a Dreamathon Kickoff, What the World Needs Now. Y'all will see it. It's going to be announced. But it's an opportunity for community to come together in virtual dream spaces and co-create. And co-create with one another, you know? So when my dream is connected to Dani's dream, and we start talking and realizing, oh my goodness, we've been thinking about some of the same things, that literally brings universal energy to the situation and helps to manifest it. So that's the piece for me. We got to start with rest.
I love that. So I think as a final note, what I want to say is thank you all. Thank you. You all have shared with us just so much wisdom and so much vulnerability as well. And you've asked us, you've challenged us to dream big, right? Dream big. So, you know, one thing, and it's been mentioned a couple of times here, is without community, there's no liberation. Without community, there's no liberation. Audre Lorde said that. So we've been talking a lot about black and brown communities, and it is important that we listen to these communities, but everyone here, everyone has a role to play. So the onus is on each and every one of us. Everyone should leave here with something in mind as to what they can do to move us closer to these visions that you all have talked about. So with that said, can we give our speakers, Dani, Tyrell, and Candice Jackson, a round of applause?
And our moderator, Sinead Younge.